this week's episode of the Fat Jockey Podcast. Kev can't make it. It's just Jono and I this week. Kev is currently with the Colonel discussing secret recipes. Apparently, the Colonel said he was in need of a big dip and he couldn't think of anybody better for the job. So, anyway, on to business in hand. Because of the BHA internet troubles on Tuesday and the 24-hour delay, we've only had a limited amount of time to assess the handicaps. So this podcast is really going to be a heads up about the horses that we're shortlisting. No massive detail. We'll largely be working from those shortlists and narrowing down when the weights are announced next week. We'll also talk a bit about our overall approach to the handicaps, and I'll perhaps share a few stats and trends that I use to do a bit of narrowing down. So I reckon straight into it, Jono. To kick things off, what's your approach to the handicaps now the entries are out?
So I will. I don't tend to lean too much on trends. Certainly not in the non-handicap races. I treat them very, very kind of sparingly, but I do kind of at least take them on board for the handicaps. It is in the back of my mind. It won't ever. If I fancy a horse and it didn't meet the trends, I'm not going to write it off. But I do look at them, and it can help kind of a bit more basis and a bit more of a nudge. Certainly if there's several kind of on my short list. I think I don't really have a kind of blanket rule. I treat them quite differently. I tend to, like the Ultima, for instance, I think quite a it isn't one for too many shocks. Obviously, you don't really have many of the Irish, whereas say the Fred Winter Boodles that throw up all sorts of prices, and that's just on day one. I generally start on looking at maybe previous festival form. That's probably a starting point for the horses. Like, in all honesty, most races, non-handicaps as well. But I'll often initially kind of go back to last year, whether it's horses going back in the same race. Obviously, Grand Annual would be one where it's quite a good race for repeat runners, and often actually they kind of their first attempt isn't when they'll actually win the race. So that's definitely a race that I'll go back over kind of the last couple of years. How about you?
A lot at the entry stage, I tend to sort of work my way through, really trying to get manageable short lists for each race, and not to all exclusion. I'll have a second cut at that when the weights are out. But what I try and do is get myself to manageable lists so I can work on the weights really quickly, because markets can move at that point very quickly. If you're not on the right horse, very often you can see a price tumble in front of your eyes. So I try to get myself to the point where I think if anything that's going to be gambled, I found it already. So I've either because this is the advantage of having a book approach, because it gives you the comfort of doing that, and I'll lay off it again anyway. So ideally, what I'm looking for is the horses that are going to shorten, because it gives me a lot of flexibility in terms of my approach all the way through to the festival. And I don't want to. I may end up backing 7, 8, even 10 horses in a handicap, but I'm not going to keep all of those horses by the time I get to the race. I'm probably going to end up with 2, 3, 4 win bets still. Probably 2 or 3 win bets running, and I might have 2 or 3 that are still backed each way effectively, and perhaps 2 or 3 where I've kept the place element and I've laid the win parts, and I've laid all of the rest of them. So that tends to be my approach. So I've captured the price. Theoretically, occasionally you'll get caught. Something will drift. You've got it wrong. but you'll get it right more often than not. So I try and capture those prices. So the shortlist that I do now tend to be the start of that. I've still got a little bit more work to do. Some of the shortlists that I talk about today, I won't be backing all of those right now. Some of them I will. Some of them I already have. But by the time I get to choosing the weights next week, I'm really starting to make some decisions. And some fairly hard decisions at that point. Most of those I'll make on Tuesday, perhaps a little bit of work that slips into Wednesday, but I'll have a late night on Tuesday generally, working my way through. As I say, the book approach really works for me there because I look to lock in profit. And what I've got running, I leave running at, good prices. So, and, with some of those, I might just lay off part of the stake as well. So, I have a plan in terms of where I'm aiming for a horse to, I'm aiming for a horse to be worth something in each race, depending on how easy or difficult I regard the race. So I have a target number against each horse. And therefore I'm looking to take the gap between, the maximum win and what I can lay. So that's kind of my approach. So I've done some of that work. I use a lot of trends and stats that I keep for myself for that kind of thing. I'm going to share some of those this evening as we work through the races. We're not going to go through horse in detail tonight. We can't. We have to be realistic in terms of what we can do and achieve in, a day. And we've got day jobs as well. So just being realistic, I have a fairly quick way of narrowing down, which I use at this stage, and I've done most of that. That's not a massive amount of work. So really, I'm probably just going to talk through some of those stats for each race, and then you and I are going to alternate as we work our way through. I think that's the plan. So I guess we kick off in order. We do the Ultima. So, which is a bit raw at the moment, as you can imagine, and not just for me, for a lot of people. The shock of Galahad Quest not being entered yesterday, genuine shock. I never, ever conceived the fact that they wouldn't enter him. It feels illogical. They've upped him in trip to 3 miles at the weekend. They're running. They obviously believe they're going there with some kind of chance. He's now exposed over 2.5 miles around Cheltenham. He's run around there a few times. I expect him to run a decent race in March, but each time he's run as though he needs further and would improve for going further. And on the easier old course in the Ultima, I think that would have been made for him personally. The fact that the entry wasn't made and they made a 2.5 mile entry is just, I still can't figure it out. It makes no sense at all. Anyway, let's talk about the Ultima itself. So, a few stats that I sort of work from. Horses that run in the Hennessy and novices, both those sources have a great record, and the winner generally comes from one group or the other. Also, horses that have run in the race previously have got a great record of coming back and placing. Vintage Clouds obviously went one better last year. He came back and won. But his profile was one of those that would come back in place. But having said that, he was £8 better off from the previous year. He just had a wind up. I guess the signs were there. And he beat last year's Naiad Happy Go Lucky. We had a good touch regardless on the place part, but I think we were pretty unlucky with Happy Go Lucky to run into Vintage Clouds actually. And he's worth considering again this year, certainly. You want the winner to have its best or at least equal best racing post rating over 3 miles or more. 8 of the last 9 winners had run at the festival previously, so there's not too much to work through there generally. The course experience is pretty important. It doesn't need to be necessarily course winning form, but course experience is a real plus for this race. Horses with headgear have a really good record in the race. Vintage Clouds fitted that one as well. He was staring us in the face, really. Favourites have an awful record. Kustar Savola is the only one for a very long time. I can hardly say the words Kustar Savola with the same he's connected to at the moment, but there we go. And the other one is it's 15 years since the Irish trained a winner, but that's not one I'd be taking too much notice of at the moment, because I think somebody had a whole summer to be plotting some horses for every single handicap, and I think this one may have come into consideration. So I don't think you'd be ignoring Irish horses for this race this year. I've got a short list for the race of, I don't know, probably about a dozen horses from the original entry. So the first three ran in the Hennessy. Cloudy Glen, who won the Hennessy, is dropping back down the weights. Fullback, who has run well at Cheltenham since the Hennessy, didn't think he really ran his race at Newbury. And Fortescue, who was very close to fullback. Those two finished pretty much together. Fullback's better off at the weights now, by the way. He won at the weekend. So that's form that certainly needs looking at. Vintage Cloud's the next one on the list. Can't ignore him despite his age. Does he know, as a novice, was treated very lightly for the weekend's win, I thought. Although I think he probably, with his new rating, probably is more likely to place than win. But he's a bit quirky, not the best jumper. He's one of those that be seat of his pants. The other novice I've got on my shortlist is Fantastic Ass of Twiston Davis. I'm not sure whether he's coming here. I think he's got an entry. In fact, do you know, John? Has he got an entry in the National Hunt Chase as well? That one.
Let me have a look.
While I'm just reading these off, just have a quick look for me. Kilteely Briggs is the one for connections. They've got the Kilteely Briggs and the Wolf. Might actually consider that. I haven't got that one on my list, but might consider that one later.
He does. Sorry, Paul. He does have the National Hunt Chase entry. Okay. Fantastic.
All right. Fortunately, everything's no run and no bet, so he might be worth the guess. I actually do quite like him. Eclair Surf and Corot Rambler both ran in the Classic Chase at Warwick, and I quite like that form. And also the third runner in that race, Jericho Rot, but he's got no chance of getting in this. I'll be talking about him for another race. But I do like that Classic Chase form. And it's worth remembering that Corot Rambler has got form around Cheltenham as well. And he's got that kind of profile where, if he'd have run every race to his full potential, he probably would have been handicapped out of this. But, he's not the best jumper, shall we say. But the Cheltenham fences are pretty soft these days. And I don't think it's a coincidence that his best run came at Cheltenham this season. It's arguable you could say that the second at Warwick was just as good. But, he jumped the best at Cheltenham. I don't think that's coincidence. So I think he's a proper player. Phoenix Way is in the big race at Kempton at the weekend, so he could go and blow his mark in that. But there isn't a whole lot of money for him, so it may well be to blow the cobwebs away for this. There's no doubting he has the potential to be a very well handicapped horse. So they're the UK-based horses and novices. As I said, there is also the possibility that somebody's been plotting away at Colentra. And there's a couple of entries there that I think are of interest. Death Duty, I think, has been well talked about. Sachs has mentioned him. I think it was pretty sweet on him for the Kim Muir. I think a few of us don't really understand why he's not entered there. I'm not sure Gordon actually realised he wasn't going to get a few pounds tax. But he's going to get in at 145 or 144 or 145, whichever it is. I think Gordon might actually end up kicking himself. But anyway, that's another story. Also, interestingly, Fleur's ended up here. I think there's a possibility Fleur might actually come to this race too. I think he'd be better over 3 miles than 2.5. He's not going to get in the Kim Muir, so it's here or he's not going to get into the he's not going to get into the Kim Muir. It's either here or the Plate. I think he'd probably be better over 3 miles, but I think most people do fancy him for the Plate rather than here. I think he's interesting here personally. And two more that you can't ignore: Dion Kerr, Noel Mead, and Noble Yates, which is a proper talking horse of Emmett Mullins. So that's my fairly long short list at the moment. What's your thoughts? What's your thoughts, John? Anything to add to that? Anything you don't like?
I think some of the similar horses, to be honest. Just on the Irish point, yes, it's the one handicap that you can kind of focus on the English. But yeah, I mean, Elliot's entered a lot in the entries. Obviously, it probably only had one or two that run. But yeah, I'll just be wary about completely dismissing the Irish. And if you look at the last 2 years, only 2 of the 16 runners were Irish last year, and only 2 of the 23 the year before. So obviously, they've not done much in the race. However, the numbers haven't been there. So it's kind of one of those stats that says, yeah, the Irish don't do well, but they just don't send many horses here. This year, they've actually got quite a few entries. So, yeah, if they make up a lot of the runners come the day, I think that could be a stat that kind of gets busted this year, potentially.
Yeah, I've got the same thing.
I think, yes, it's not a race that I get put off with weights. 150 horses have done well. I think you're right that generally they're probably place prospects. On Sport 2 is the only one that's won he won off 155 actually. But yeah, in terms of place records, I wouldn't let that put me off at all. Shanty Flyer, Lakeview Lad, I Right, Sapage, Vindication, Holywell. You can kind of reel off horse after horse that's done well. Class kind of comes through in this race.
It's interesting actually because Ultima ran in a novice chase against Native River at
Newbury. Was that in winter,
I had a massive rating for that. I was all over him for the Ultima against all of my trends because he'd put up something that was exceptional. That race was exceptional.
Isn't there was another decent horse in there that it wasn't there?
There were three very good horses that came out of that same race. I'm the same. I can't remember what the third one was now. But obviously, Native River went on to be second and first in the Gold Cup, although he underperformed in the National Hunt Chase the same season that Ultima 2 won the Ultima. But there were 2 very, very good horses, and he, I'm not a slave to my stats and my trends. There's the reasons why I look at other horses, and he gave me one of the most compelling reasons I've ever had. They put a figure up that was off the charts for novices.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? You shouldn't let a trend put you off a horse. Let them help build up your case. But I think if you really fancy a horse and you hold back because of a stat or a trend, yeah, I wouldn't. I'd stick to your judgment. I mean, in terms of some of the horses you mentioned, Cloudy Glen, he's one I've backed. Obviously, Kim Muir second, won the Ladbroke. Vintage Clouds, I think you have to back each way. I think 5 places currently. Yeah, he ran a really good race the other day. Has followed a similar path. I think he's had a wind up as well. So yeah, I think this is his race. I would be surprised if he won it, but I think you've got to kind of go in, and he's still a decent price. Fantastic ass. I didn't see actually he had the National Hunt entry. I do like him. Obviously got course form. Le Homme Press. He came third. Also, the Glancing Queen was ahead of him. 3 under through 5. So he's been running in really good company this season. He's a definite interest.
Talking about 3 under through 5. He cleared 3 under through 5 isn't going to win the Brown Advisory Novice Chase, but he's actually handicapped to win this, weirdly. And again, if you've got the card there, you might be able to see his mark. But I gave him more than the passing glance because he could run a really big race in this off his mark.
152. That wouldn't.
He won't come here, but he's owned by the sponsor.
Yeah, the McNeils.
The temptation of the brand advisor would be too much, I suspect, and they've said they're going there. You know, that said, there's probably only brave man's game going to turn up. It'll be a 2-horse race the way everybody else is talking.
Yeah.
So, and then Bob Ollinger will defect, and he'll end up being Bob Ollinger will come there and he'll be the only one to run against him. It's just one of those sort of weird situations where nobody can make their mind up. But we're digressing. So yeah, he'd actually be one of those at a higher rate that would interest me, but I don't think he's coming here anyway.
Yeah, I thought it was higher than 152. Actually, I think you're right. He's not going to come, but yeah, one of those. If he did, he would definitely be of interest. And yeah, I don't think I've backed anyone else yet. But yeah, it definitely overall, I think it's quite a steady race. I think it's quite a good race as well. Come the day for kind of tri-cars forecasts. I don't go overboard with them, but this is a race that I do that in actually, because again, I think generally the kind of top 6 in the market, they tend to figure around the places.
It's
you can
not
do
the
quite
hardest.
well. I think focusing on the head of the market.
Yeah, it's not the hardest of races to figure out. It does often throw someone at a big price, somewhere in the places though. There's normally someone that comes and scuppers you. So you're more likely to get the full cast up than the tri-cast because someone will run into third place at 50 to 1 or something. Actually, just on that point, there was one that caught my eye at a really big price. I've no need to back it right now because it'll be that same big price on the day probably, or maybe even bigger. It's just possible that Henderson's playing a blinder with Brave Eagle. He's a stone or more less this year than he was last year. You look at all his form and it's horrible. It's the sort of form that you look at and you say, I just can't back this horse. But then you say, why are they still persistent? And why are they coming back to this race again? Assuming that they do. I think he's either 14 or 16 pounds lower than he was last year. And he's well below his previous winning form. He could be gone at the game. He's only a 9-year-old, Older horses have done pretty well in this race. I mean, look at Vintage Clouds last year, for example. And
he was off. He started last season off 156, and now he's down to 140.
He's 140. So Henderson could be playing a bit of a blinder with him, but we'll see. There's no rush to back him. He's just the kind of horse that takes my eye every so often. For a place, he's not going to go. It's not the kind of horse that wins the race, but he might be one that I'll back at a big each way price later.
Yeah, and then fullback would probably be the other one that you mentioned as well. I think he's quite interesting.
He's got a nice profile for the race. I know Gary Moore had said they might not come here, and then I've seen the entry, so just feels as though he's trying to keep it all a bit low key. Gary Moore tends to run his horse at Cheltenham if he's got the horses that are good enough, so I'd be surprised if he didn't.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the Midlands Grand National, which I'm guessing
I saw that.
It's probably going to be their route, but if not, definitely of interest here, I think.
He doesn't look like one that wants to go 4 miles to me, if I'm honest.
No.
But strange things have happened. So the Midlands.
His last run, Yarlawenki. I mean, that was kind of Yarlawenki's race, wasn't it, year on year? Yeah. But he definitely got outstayed that day.
Yeah, exactly that. And Yarlawenki's at veteran stage now as well. So, if you're going to win, minor nationals and certainly major ones, you've got to be beating horses like Yarlawenki now, haven't you? Off that kind of rating. So, look, the Midlands National often isn't a very deep race, but normally has 2 or 3 good horses in it, and 2 or 3 good horses that are thorough stayers. So, look, who knows? The prizeman is pretty good there, so you can see the temptation. I hope he comes to this race because I think he's a definite player.
Yeah, absolutely.
We only care about Cheltenham anyway, so